Jazakallah khairan, Brother Obaid. What a wonderful introduction. At this time, I would now like to introduce our guest speakers, Bee Moorhead, who is the Executive Director of Texas Impact, and Asma Mahdi, the former board member of Green Muslims in California. Bee Moorhead is the Executive Director of Texas Impact. Texas Impact is a statewide religious grassroots network. It works to advance state public policies that are consistent with universally held social principles of the Abrahamic traditions. Its members include individuals, congregations, and governing bodies of the Christian, Jewish, and Muslim faiths. Bee has served on the Texas Commission on Environmental Qualities Pollution Prevention Advisory Council and currently serves on several advisory committees to the Texas Health and Human Services Commission. She has received climate project presenter training with former Vice President Al Gore. During the presentations, I would request all attendees to write down questions in the chat box. Our speakers will answer as many questions as time permits at the end of both their presentations. I now invite Bee Moorhead to please begin. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope everyone can hear me. If not, somebody put something in the chat box and let me know. But I'm going to assume it all is going well with this technology, which we're so grateful for. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all ICNA members today about climate change, real challenges, real solutions. The first thing I want to do is tell you a little bit about who I am and why I'm here talking to you today. So Texas Impact is an organization that was established in 1973, and we have kind of two branches. One is Texas Impact, the lobby organization, and the other is what's called the Texas Interfaith Center for Public Policy, which is our think tank arm. Most of you are probably familiar with this idea that there are groups that do policy research and education, kind of like what I'm doing today with you, the education part. And then we go to the Capitol and we lobby on policy issues, including climate change. But even more important, we help you figure out how are the most effective ways for you to engage with your legislators and other people in power. And I know Asma will agree with me that the most important thing we can do is to help you understand how to be an effective participant in the process. So I just want to make sure that you know that Texas Impact is a membership organization. Mosques and individuals and other groups can join. ICNA, in fact, is a member of Texas Impact, and that's how we initially got connected. So we appreciate your membership very much and are happy to work with you. My name, as you know, is Bee Moorhead, and I am trained to do the climate reality presentation. I'm part of the climate reality leadership team, or leadership corps, and I have been the executive director of Texas Impact since the year 2000. This is a picture of me at COP21 in Paris, and as long as we're talking about the climate reality leadership corps, I just want to make a plug that this is an opportunity for people, just lay people and professionals all over the world to work directly with former Vice President Al Gore to get trained on the science and the political thinking and the policy solutions around climate change. If anyone's interested at the end of this presentation, either you can contact me for more information or you can go directly to climatereality.org. Asma Mahdi, who's going to be speaking after me, is a former board member of Green Muslims, as you heard, and also she was in Paris as well. She was there representing Religions of Peace. She was there with a group of several young people. I think she's going to talk to you a little bit about it. It was an amazing opportunity experience for the young people, but it's also great for you to know that the American Muslim community was represented in Paris by one of your up-and-coming young leaders. So that was great for you all. So what I want to do today is talk about two things, probably three things. One is climate change basics. So what are global warming and climate change? Why do scientists think those things are problems? And what are already manifestations of climate change that are problematic in the world? Then next we'll talk about Paris and what happened there and why it's important. And then finally, Asma is going to talk to you about ways the Muslim community and mosques can participate in climate solutions. So first of all, what is global warming? And I know there's probably a range of knowledge among participants on this webinar. So if you already know, if you're a climate scientist, my apologies in advance. And if you've never heard of climate change before, also my apologies in advance because this won't clean up everything for you. But hopefully it's we get us all on the same page. So climate change, first of all, global warming refers to this phenomenon that it's also called the greenhouse effect. So the sun's radiation in the form of light waves pass through the atmosphere, and that's what warms the earth at all so that it's a hospitable environment that people can live in. Most of the radiation is absorbed by the earth and warms it, and then some is radiated back into space. So some of the radiation stays in the Earth's atmosphere and makes it warmer. The Earth has a uniquely hospitable environment because of the way our environment and the kind of amount of sun radiation that we can absorb comes to us. And the way that scientists know this is they've studied other planets that are similarly situated. So, for instance, Venus has an average temperature of 850-something degrees Fahrenheit. It's obviously not possible for anything to live on it. And the reason that Venus has so much more absorbs so much more of the sun's radiation is because the carbon that absorbs that radiation in Venus's atmosphere is in the atmosphere. But on the Earth, that radiation, so 867 degrees Fahrenheit, sorry. On Earth, the sun's radiation warms carbon that is mostly in the ground. So what's important about the Earth's atmosphere is that the carbon that is present is mostly in the Earth and not out in the atmosphere. And the picture of Mercury just shows that although it's closer to the sun than Venus, it's so much cooler, and that demonstrates that it's not just the distance from the sun. It has to do with the position of carbon in the planet's environment. So, trying to make my slide go forward. So it turns out that a lot of the reason that the Earth's environment is warming now is because of the amount of carbon that's being released into the environment from the burning of fossil fuels. And that carbon is trapping radiation in the Earth's atmosphere, the way that it is trapped in Venus's atmosphere, and making the climate warmer. It's not the only thing. Carbon from fossil fuels is not the only thing. There are greenhouse gases, which is what we call these, the gases that cause the sun's radiation to be trapped in the Earth's atmosphere. They come from a lot of different places. So, industrial processes, agriculture, burning of crops and forests, oil production, various kinds of transportation, and now finally thawing permafrost, which we'll talk about more in a second. But what it all boils down to is our atmosphere is warming, and a lot of the reason for that is from burning of fossil fuels. So when the carbon in the environment goes up, the temperature of the environment goes up. Scientists have shown this over long periods of time, and you can go back actually tens of thousands of years and find the same information. But since the Industrial Revolution, it's particularly pronounced that since people started burning large amounts of fossil fuels, which fueled the Industrial Revolution, and in fact has fueled ultimately our ability to be together on this webinar on a Saturday morning from all over the country. It has also led to a rapidly accelerating warming of the environment. So, just because the environment's getting warmer doesn't necessarily mean there's a problem. So the question a lot of people have is, well, even if scientists have understood this greenhouse gas effect to be real and understand that our environment really is warming, why should that be a problem? First of all, let's talk about which scientists we mean. So the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change are a group of scientists from around the world, hundreds, I don't know if it's thousands, but it's definitely hundreds and hundreds of climate scientists from around the world who collaborate to develop models of the environment, the carbon in the environment, and what impact it might have. And they advise the World Health Organization and the United Nations on climate-related issues. What these scientists all, and it's important to know, there is virtually no disagreement among reputable scientists all over the world about the existence of the greenhouse gas effect, the potential problems that it causes, and the fact that the burning of fossil fuels is disproportionately the reason that we're having it. So of all the scientists in the world, I think 3% have any question about whether any part of that is true or not, and there aren't any reputable scientific studies that would show that climate change is not really occurring for the reasons that we've talked about. So why scientists are concerned that it's happening has a lot to do with water. And it's interesting, one of the things that we heard when we were in Paris from representatives of the World Bank was, even though the causes of climate change, a lot have to do with the air, so they have to do with putting carbon into the atmosphere, so they essentially relate to air and air pollution. The way they're manifested is through water, and the one World Bank representative said, water is the medium through which human beings will experience climate change. And we're going to talk about how true that is. So everybody knows about the water cycle, that there's water evaporates out of the oceans, as well as lakes and streams. It precipitates in the form of rain and snow, and then it goes back ultimately into the ocean, and that process goes around and around and around. So what climate change is doing is changing that really basic water cycle. So most of the extra heat that is trapped by global warming pollution goes into the ocean, and that makes the ocean hotter. We can see that the ocean heat content over the past 60 years has gone up, 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 up. And what that does is, one, it makes the ocean water warmer so it evaporates faster, which increases extreme precipitation. Also, that heat pulls moisture quickly from the soil, which relates to drought. So we end up having both extreme precipitation and flooding and drought related to climate change. Also, because it's hotter, we typically have more fires now than we did 40 years ago. And the warming ocean water is causing Arctic sea ice to melt, and what that's doing is raising the level of the water in the ocean. So as the oceans warm and the ice melts, the ocean levels get higher, and that in turn results in more flooding, and not just from precipitation, but in permanently covering parts of the land that were available before. And that, of course, leads to some very serious economic consequences, to say nothing of the human and environmental consequences. So many parts of the world are now in a position where insurance companies and investors and people with money are considering them to be not really viable in the future for any human occupation or use. So because all of these impacts, which as you can see, largely have to do with the impact of climate change on that water cycle and all the ancillary issues related to the water cycle, because of that, there are 4 primary systems that are impacted by climate change that have implications for people all over the world. One of them is food supply. So if we don't have available, reliable water, we can't have food. Water for people to live, and also for all the processes that we use water in, industrial processes and agricultural processes. Global health, so the changing climate is impacting the spread of diseases, including through animal and insect-borne diseases, but also diseases that are airborne. And then finally, infrastructure destabilization. So these are the things scientists are concerned could happen in a changing climate. Are they already happening? Absolutely they are. So we know that we've already had heat waves all over the world, and I will tell you, I pulled these slides out of the Climate Reality Project slide library. I could have pulled you hundreds and hundreds of pictures of people experiencing extreme heat all over the world. This extreme heat impacts everything, every living thing, not just people. It's also causing hardship for wildlife all over the world. People are dying in heat waves in many countries. At the same time, some people are dying because they're too hot. Some people are dying because they're too wet. So in the Philippines, this is an example of a terrible typhoon that hit the Philippines, and the Pope called on world leaders to address climate change because of the impact that it was having on people. You don't have to go to the Philippines to find evidence of extreme weather and the problems that it causes. This is New Jersey during Hurricane Sandy. This is Manhattan in the same time. And even for those of you, I think there are several of you who are here from Texas, I hope so, you know that here in our own state, flooding has caused catastrophic problems. This is Wimberley, Texas last year. Houston, Texas, I had, this is so shocking to me to see this statistic. In these 2 days, in May 25th and 26th of 2015, 162 billion gallons of water fell on Houston, Texas. That's equivalent to the entire flow of Niagara Falls for 2.5 days. And just this morning, when I looked on Facebook, I saw this post from one of my friends that it's snowing in Saudi Arabia, so all the precipitation problems aren't necessarily from liquid water. Here we have precipitation in the form of snow, and we can find plenty of examples of that causing havoc too. Sometimes there's not enough precipitation. So these are some slides of places where there's been drought. There's water rationing associated with drought. Drought also is related to more intense wildfires. And when we have intense wildfires and drought, one of the impacts that people are already seeing in many parts of the world is escalating food prices from food shortages. One place where that's hit close to home for Texas has been what's happened in Syria, which has resulted in large numbers of Syrian refugees coming to the United States and Texas. And as you know, Texas, unfortunately, the official position has not been hospitable. This is a Syrian farmer talking about what's happened to him. Syria was formerly a fertile land, and the drought wreaked havoc on the agricultural community in Syria. This is a map that shows the spread of tropical diseases as the climate warms. Some of them are coming again because insects are able to thrive in climates that they couldn't have before. And those of you who've been reading the news will know that the Zika bacteria spread through a particularly aggressive mosquito, has now shown up as far north as Boston. The infrastructure impacts are real. This is a picture of a road melting in India. But it's not just an issue of this, particularly dramatic example of the road actually melting. Also, if there's flooding, it destabilizes the foundations of buildings, and it makes the foundations of roads and bridges unstable. So all of the infrastructure that we put so much effort into creating is at risk from climate change. And again, just to talk about the real human impacts that are already happening, the Syrian refugees are not the only climate refugees in the world at this moment. Texas also has experienced a huge influx of people from Central America, as you may have read about. Central American children and families with small children, they're fleeing a largely climate-driven political situation where their countries in Central America have been so devastated by fires and floods and earthquakes and famines that they are completely politically destabilized, and it's now not safe to live there. And of course, the ultimate example of climate refugees is people whose entire land is being flooded so that they have to completely move. And Kiribati is a nation that has actually decided to purchase different land and just move its entire political and cultural situation to higher ground. So many people know that one of the world's foremost religious leaders is the Pope, and the Pope, Francis, last summer issued what's called an encyclical, which is a statement of the Pope. Typically, an encyclical is supposed to be addressed to all the Catholic churches in the world. In this case, the Pope deliberately said, this is not just a letter I'm writing to my Catholic churches. This is a letter to everyone in the world from me, the Pope, begging you to work together to address climate change. And the reason is that, as he says, the deterioration of the environment and of society affects the most vulnerable people on the planet. Everyday research and scientific research show that the gravest effects of all the attacks on the environment are suffered by the poorest people. So, it's depressing and daunting, but it's good to know that the nations of the world have been trying for a long time to get their handle on this issue, and this year in Paris, we hope represented a real turning point. So, for people who aren't familiar with the COP process, when you hear the term COP21, the thing that's important about it is 21 means this is the 21st year that this process has been happening. So a COP, a Conference of the Parties, is the body in the United Nations that governs an international convention that the United Nations establishes. So this COP, this Conference of the Parties, governs the environmental treaty called the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC. And that UNFCCC was voted on by most of the countries in the world to stabilize greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere to a level that would prevent dangerous human interference with the climate system. So the nations that are part of the UNFCCC adopted the treaty in 1992 in Rio de Janeiro. The United States is one of those countries. So there's 196 countries, including the European Union, that are members, and they have met annually since 1995. They've made progress. The UNFCCC, as an international treaty, can't set binding limits on greenhouse gas emissions for the countries. So this UN treaty can't force any country to change the way it uses or produces power or the way it farms or does crop burning or anything like that. It can't make any country do anything. But it establishes rules and seeks to find ways for the countries to work collaboratively to achieve their shared goals, which again is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions so that we don't experience catastrophic warming. Some important moments during the past 21 years. In Kyoto in 1997, they did try to have a legally binding treaty that would reduce greenhouse gas emissions. That treaty only would have applied to some of the 196 countries, and it didn't actually, the United States and Australia didn't sign it, and so it wasn't really as effective as anyone hoped it would be. In Copenhagen, there was an attempt to compile commitments from countries for how much they would reduce their greenhouse gas emissions by 2020. And then in Cancun, there was a historic agreement that the goal that all the countries should be working towards was 2 degrees, no more than 2 degrees Celsius of warming by 2030. So, and Asma, I think it's 2030, and Asma can tell me if I'm saying that wrong. In Warsaw in 2013, they adopted a new approach that had to do with each country of the 196 determining their own contributions to how the world was going to keep the temperature rise to no more than 2 degrees Celsius. These were called Intended Nationally Determined Contributions, INDCs. Now that we've had Paris and the countries have all brought these pledges, these ideas of what they're going to be able to do to reduce their own emissions, now they're just called NDCs, Nationally Determined Contributions. So all of those 196 countries made commitments about how much they were going to reduce carbon emissions and what they were going to do to achieve those reductions. When you add all of those reductions up, they don't add up to enough to keep temperature rise limited to 2 degrees Celsius. So the next project for the COP, so COP22, will be how to make everybody pledge just a little bit more or do something different so that we can really get to that 2 degrees Celsius. But the COP21 was really important because this was where the UN negotiators from these 196 countries created the framework for using individual nationally determined contributions to achieve a global goal. So this is where they put in place the framework for how all the countries will work together to reduce the impacts of climate change. It's a written agreement and you can read it. I just looked at this website this morning. They've been adding information to it constantly since the United Nations, since the negotiations ended in Paris in December. And you can see that you can read the actual Paris Agreement here in a number of languages. I would encourage you to do so. When I first looked at it, it looked pretty daunting, but then when I really read through it, it was pretty easy to understand, and it's helpful to see how they worded the things that are in it. One thing that you should know is that there's, as part of each country setting its own pledge for how it's going to reduce its emissions, there's a lot of emphasis now increasingly on what entities can do that are not countries. So if you're the United States, you can't, the easiest thing would be for Congress to make some law and say, this is how everybody in the country is going to do it, and that's how we're going to achieve our emissions reductions. But as you know, that's politically very challenging. It's less challenging politically, although more challenging logistically, to have the subnational units, so counties and cities and states, and even businesses and even coalitions, like coalitions of religious groups, make their own pledges and say, well, we want to help the United States achieve its emissions reduction goal, and here's what we can do to help. Here's how we're going to reduce our own emissions in, for instance, Austin, Texas. So that process is called the non-state actor climate actions, and this part of the UN website is the non-state actor zone for climate action. It's going through a lot of changes, but one thing you could keep in mind is if you're thinking of ways to be to help move the process forward, you feel like this is a really good, important thing, and you just wonder how you in your own life could be part of the process. One thing you can do is talk to your local elected officials and ask them what kind of commitments your local community is making to help the United States meet its carbon emission goals. So that brings us to the idea of faith engagement with climate change. This is actually the Grand Mosque in Paris that we visited as part of our trip there to represent the faith community at the COP21. And just as an aside, so the faith community and the cities and counties and all those other non-state actors don't participate in the actual negotiations of the treaty. Instead, Asma and I were both in this area, the climate generation space, which was an area they refer to as the civil society area, where people from all these different non-political and local government communities could come together to exchange ideas and come up with strategies for working together in the future. In the United States, and one of the groups that was represented there heavily, and something that you should know about no matter where you are in the United States, is Interfaith Power and Light. Interfaith Power and Light is a national organization. It has chapters in most states in the United States. It is an interfaith response to climate change, and what Interfaith Power and Light does is to hold events, provide resources like toolkits and speakers for conferences and things like that to help faith communities of all faith traditions take action locally and in public policy to address climate change. Green Muslims has representation in Interfaith Power and Light, and in Texas, Texas Impact is the organization that is the Interfaith Power and Light organization. So we are Texas Interfaith Power and Light, and we have local chapters in several cities, including Fort Worth and Dallas, San Antonio, Austin, and Houston. So if you're in Texas and you're interested in getting involved in this issue locally, you might consider contacting us about getting hooked up with your local Interfaith Power and Light. And finally, I'll say Texas Impact, as part of our faith participation in Paris, did put together a video blog called Boots and Berets, where we interviewed people, including Asma, about why their faith told them it was important to be in Paris, to be engaged on climate. And I will say a lot of the people that we talked to really did echo the concern that the Pope raised in his encyclical, which is that more than anything else, we can't get away from the fact that the worst impacts of climate change are going to be felt by the people who can least deal with them. And in fact, that's already who's starting to suffer the consequences, as you saw in this slide. So now, I'm going to turn it over to Asma, and she is going to talk to you about green Muslims and what you can do.
Great, thanks, Bree. Assalamualaikum, everybody. My name is Asma Mahdi. I am a former board member for Green Muslims. And also I was, like Bree mentioned, or Dee mentioned, that I was at the climate change talks in Paris with her as a delegate for Religions for Peace USA. We were a group of 4 up-and-coming faith leaders that are involved in the faith world, but also have somewhat of a science background. So I'm actually an environmental scientist by training, and I had the opportunity to apply for this opportunity to go with Religions for Peace to Paris to, be one of the faith voices there, and it was really an amazing experience. So what I wanted to do today is talk a little bit about green Muslims, talk about, why is this important for the Muslim community here in the U.S., but also across the world, and what is it that we can do in order to help combat climate change. So background on green Muslims, they began in 2007 during Ramadan at an iftar. It was a group of friends that came together in Washington, D.C., and realized that, during Ramadan we really think about, it creates a space for us to think about giving and to really reflect on our actions. And so one of those reflections was, what is the impact that we're having on the planet? And so what a group of people did was they came together and they did a zero trash iftar. So that meant that they made food and did everything that made sure that there was no trash that was made, so no disposable goods, no plastic or paper napkins. And even when it came to food, they were very mindful of the type of food they were making. And so from that, they came up with this idea of, this is a really great way to start something, a movement within the Muslim community to get people to care about the planet in a perspective that speaks to our deen. So I think, Dee, can you switch to the next slide? Thank you. Okay. So this is a slide and Dee talked a little bit about this, about how climate change is impacting, weather phenomenons, and we see the drought in Syria, which is like the photo on the left-hand side on the bottom, and then there are these mass floodings in Bangladesh, and, entire island nations are going underwater. So why is this so important? Well, there are about 2 billion Muslims on this planet, and the majority of those Muslims live around the equator, and the majority of where climate change is being impacted directly is around those regions. So Muslims are being affected by this significantly. The Maldives is an island nation. It's a Muslim majority island nation. It will be the first island nation that will be submerged underwater, most likely by the year 2050. So all that means is 8 feet of water has to rise, so sea level has to rise about 8 feet, and then that entire island will disappear. They will become the first environmental refugees, and also most potentially the first people that will lose an entire national identity. And most of them are Muslim. So this is an issue that impacts us all around. We see the issue with Syria, where there was a lot of unrest in Syria, which actually stemmed from a drought that happened. And then now we have seen how that crisis has unfolded with political instability layered on top of what was happening. In Bangladesh, there are floodings that happen every year around monsoon season, and this also happens in India. And it's getting worse and worse by the year, where you have hundreds of thousands of people who are losing homes, who are losing their lives. So this climate change really impacts Muslims across the world. All right, next slide. Great. So why is this important to the Muslim community? Well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made us all khalifas of the earth. He has called upon us to protect it, to care for it, and to live in harmony with our natural environment. He created the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and we try to live in his example. Brother Ubaid started off with a great hadith about water conservation and why it's important to be very mindful of how much we consume. And I think that is something that we tend to forget a lot about, especially in the U.S. or even in the global north, as they call it. We do a lot of consumption. We buy a lot, and we don't think about like how much, for example, like packaging something comes in. Like we use a lot of plastic, and plastic is something that does not ever degrade over time. So we do a lot of consumption. We need to really think about being more mindful of that. So one thing that we could do, for example, is water conservation. The Prophet only used to use one mud, as they say, or about close to a cup or a little more than a cup of water to do wudu. So something that we've done here in DC at like George Washington University and some other places is put up signs about, a little sign that talks about the hadith and then, how much water that the Prophet would use. And so that way people are reminded when they are doing wudu, ablution before we pray, that they use as less as possible. And that's something that we want to continue doing. All right. So what else can we do? Well, this past year, in response to the Pope's encyclical, there were climate scientists and also Islamic scholars that came together in Turkey to put together the Islamic Declaration on Climate Change. And this was presented actually to Ban Ki-moon at the Climate Change Conference in Paris. And it was a document that's pieced together, that lays out different hadiths, different Quranic verses, and actually says what we can do as individuals, as communities, as states, and as countries to really combat some of these issues. They talk about energy efficiency and how to reduce greenhouse gases, tangible things that we can do. So here in the U.S., for example, I'm sure some of you are probably aware of the Environmental Protection Agency, and they have these energy audit programs. A lot of the times you can, work with a local nonprofit, and I think Interfaith Power and Light you can maybe speak to this a little more, but they do help congregations do energy audits. So if you have a mosque or an area or a masjid that you want to do an energy audit for, they will actually come in and kind of walk you through where you can help reduce or help become more efficient. And then I know we did one recently down in Atlanta, and they sent Green Muslims an email saying that they did this entire energy audit and they're actually saving close to $800 a year now, which is really great. So there are these small things that we can do to really help, all right. Next slide. Okay. So Green Muslims has put together a couple resources. Last year we started something called Our Deen is Green, which is a youth outdoor education program. One of the things that we believe is starting education really young, especially environmental education, through an Islamic lens. So the mission of the organization is to live the environmental spirit of Islam. And so what we did is we put together the Our Deen is Green program for kids ranging from about 8 years in age to about 15 years in age. And we broke it down into 4 weeks. And we built curriculum for this. So there was curriculum on water, food, energy, and water, food, energy, and there's one more, and waste. And we actually got the idea for this from a book called Green Bean. So if you haven't heard of the book Green Bean, or you would like to check it out, I would highly encourage you to Google it and, download it. It's a great read. So we broke up 4 weeks into these different sections, and each week we would take out kids, teach them a little bit about the environment itself, but then also what does Islam say about water and water conservation? What does Islam say about consumption and food? But then we took them to like a farm to teach them and show them where their food comes from. It's pretty shocking when we ask kids, where does your food come from? Where does your mom get the rice from? And usually they say, well, she goes to the grocery store. And then we ask them, well, how does it get to the grocery store? And they'll say, well, it comes on a truck. And then we ask, well, how does the truck get it? And so we're trying to get them to make the connections that at the end of the day, everything that we do somehow goes back to its native form, which is given to us by our planet. And so that was a really cool project, especially when we went to the farm. We made them think about how much gas is used in order for an apple to make it from a farm onto a truck. If you live on the East Coast, then potentially drive very far and make it into a grocery store, into your mom and dad's car, and then into your house. So they looked at their entire, what we call a carbon footprint, to get them to also start thinking about how can I buy food locally so I reduce my carbon footprint. How do we go to farmers markets? Should we start a local garden? So these were ideas that we started, putting or planting with the kids, and I think it was really great. We've heard that some of the kids have actually gone back to their mosques and started garden projects. That was one of the things that we did was through education is instilling this knowledge in our children very early on through an Islamic lens. Another thing that we do is we have put together a green khutbah guide. So if you go onto our website, and I have resources at the end of this presentation, we have a green khutbah guide with hadiths and ayats that, speak about climate change and all that, talk about what is it that Allah Ta'ala says we need to do in order to protect our planet. And then some other things that we have as well are on Green Muslim's website is a zero waste trash kit of how you can put in your mosque or even in your home, if you're going out to a picnic or anything, a kit together so that way when you have events, when you have large events, especially during Ramadan when we have iftars, how can you reduce all the waste that's created during that time? And then last but not least, I just wanted to also remind folks about, one of the big things that we think about a lot is consumption. Putting up signs about, being mindful of water during wudu, and only eating as much as you need and not wasting food. All right, next slide. Oh, did we miss one? Or maybe not. Yep, yeah, okay. Sorry. So I put together these lists of resources. If the presentation is shared, you can click on the Green Khutbah Guide, which it's directly from our website, as well as the Ramadan Toolkit. And then the Islamic Declaration on Climate Change is something that Islamic Relief kind of led the charge on. We had an opportunity to look at it beforehand and provide comments on it. And it's a great document. I would recommend everyone to take a look at it. It is very accessible and easy to read. And it lays out some great tangible actions that we all can take to reduce our impact on the planet. And then finally, I also wanted to share Green Bean, which is the book that Ibrahim Abdul Mateen wrote I read this book. It's a very inspirational and powerful book on his journey, but also about what Islam says and how there's so much beauty within our religion. There's more than 100 verses in the Quran that talk about the planet. And that's something that gets lost, especially right now with so much going on. We need to kind of bring that beauty back out and remind ourselves of how much of that is within Islam. And I think Green Bean did a pretty good job at like taking the first trip at that. And then finally, last year, Green Muslims actually had the opportunity to present at ICNA, which happened here in Baltimore. So I found the link to the YouTube session that we had. If anybody does want to check it out, it's a lot of the same information, but it goes into depth on a couple of things and initiatives that other people across the country are starting to do. So if you wanted to take a look at that, that's also available there. And I think I have a last slide. So that I wanted to share Green Muslims' website, which is greenmuslims.org. And Brother Colin Christopher is actually the executive director, and he was one of the presenters at ICNA last year and would be more than happy, I know, to do a webinar series on any like specific part of Green Muslims or anything that if ICNA wanted to, further continue a partnership, would be interested in doing. So I thought I'd just share that information as well. And now I think I'm going to turn it back over to either Bee or Asma.
So I'm gonna, this is Bee, and I guess I'm gonna start answering some of these questions that we've gotten during the presentation. So the first question that came just in the order of appearance was, what really constitutes catastrophic warming? So remember the the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, all those scientists, the agreement that they have is that the world needs to keep warming below 2 degrees Celsius to avoid kind of the most disruptive impacts of global warming. And when they say disruptive, a lot what they really mean is those the big ocean changes. So the really high sea level rise that would really cut off a lot of the currently most populated and also most fertile areas of land in the world because they'd be underwater. And also if the oceans warm so significantly, they will, it'll be harder for sea life. And Asma didn't talk a lot about her work in ocean science, but we did talk about that in Paris. And ocean life, it turns out, is really important to life on Earth, including because a lot of the people in the world get a lot of their protein sources from life in the ocean. So the catastrophic level is 2 degrees Celsius. For that to happen by the end of the current century, we need to have pretty much phased out burning of fossil fuels in a way that releases carbon into the environment. And how quickly we're able to really ratchet that down is going to make a lot of difference on how able we are to meet the 2 degree target and kind of how close we flirt with it. So if we could really ratchet down our emissions right away, we would still continue to warm, but it would taper off a lot more quickly. If we keep waiting and waiting and waiting until 2050, then we're going to have to really reduce emissions precipitously in order to avoid that more than 2 degrees warming. Obviously, the 2 degrees warming is not like the edge of a cliff. No one knows what exactly would happen if it was 2.5 degrees or 3 degrees. But what they know is at some point there's sort of a tipping point with some of the systems, some of the ecosystems and the water systems that it would be very hard to recover from kind of in a human timeline. So that's my answer. And Asma, I don't know if you want to add anything to that?
No, I think you did a really good job. Yeah, just to reiterate, like most of the planet's populations lives in coastal communities, so more than half of the planet, and something that happens as carbon is emitted out so the ocean is a huge carbon sink, as we call it, so it absorbs a lot of the carbon into the water, and that is not great for the animals that live there because they require certain chemicals in order to, what we say is to produce like their shells. So a lot of sea life that have shells will no longer be able to do that, and if they cannot produce shells, which are made out of calcium and carbonate because there's too much carbon in the water, then they become susceptible to either die-offs or they become susceptible to predators eating them. So it's a chain of reactions that happens.
Thanks for adding that. So another question that somebody that came in kind of right away during the presentation was, so now that we have this framework from Paris where we've decided that the nations of the world have decided that the way to address this problem is for each nation, kind of regardless of its capacity. If it has only a little bit of capacity, it can do a little bit. If it's like the United States that has a lot of wealth and capacity, but also emits a lot of carbon, so therefore should have more responsibility to produce more emissions. Now that we've sort of taken that approach, is there anybody holding the nations accountable to actually reducing emissions? Will the emissions reductions be met? I mean, so like we said, the treaty isn't binding. So in other words, there's no global police who can come to the United States and put everybody in timeout or anything because we didn't reduce our emissions enough. There's one of the sort of immediate responses is kind of shaming. I mean, the world is watching. Now we're all watching each other. And so I think the United Nations hope is that there's essentially peer pressure that comes to bear that everyone's, doesn't want to be seen as the country that didn't meet what they said they would do. So it's not as though it was externally imposed. Someone will be able to say to the United States, well, you said you were going to achieve this amount of reductions. If you didn't think you could do it, why didn't you just say a lower number or ask for help? Instead, we were counting on you, and you didn't deliver. It's a little bit like a global potluck, right? Everyone's going to bring something to the party, a little bit or a lot of emissions reductions. But whatever you said you were going to bring, if you don't bring it, we'll notice. Because even if all you said was you would bring a bag of chips, if we get there and there's not enough food for everybody, we'll say, well, who was supposed to bring the bag of chips? Canada. Well, you didn't do it, so now we're all sorry. So there's going to be, not to call Canada out, Canada's not going to be a big problem. But anyway, so there's that kind of peer accountability. There's also just to be, not to be scary about it, but there's the accountability of what's really happening in the world. So if the nations don't achieve what they need to, it will be clearer and clearer that there is real suffering in places that really can't afford it. Maldives, like Asma was saying, Syria, and countries around the equator, which have disproportionately large Muslim populations, incidentally, and they will know that we need to step it up because the populations of those countries will be coming and knocking on the United States' door saying, we can't live where we were, so now can we come live with you? So there's that as well. There's one other question I was going to answer, and then I'm going to let Asma take the rest of these because I think she can give you some really practical stuff. And the last question that I'm going to answer is, or at least of this batch, are heart disease and cancer somehow connected with greenhouse gases? So one of the big problems for scientists for a long time was carbon doesn't make people sick exactly. So, we would talk about air pollution and, everybody knows about smog and things that cause asthma and make children sick. the carbon isn't really a thing that hurts people by itself. It's this impact that it's having in the environment. So scientists used to say, well, we don't really want to call it carbon pollution because it's not exactly the same thing. Today, I think what anybody who works on science or policy and climate change would say is it is pollution. It's not pollution the same way that smog is pollution, but it's polluting our environment even if we can't see it and even if it doesn't make us sick directly. Also, though, it is making us sick because as the climate changes, food sources become harder to come by, water becomes harder to come by. It's hot, so people can't exercise outside as much. So it's having a lot of sort of secondary health impact where, you can't exactly put your finger on the carbon and say, that's the culprit. But if you trace it all the way back, you see that, yeah, the climate change is what's really producing all these sometimes hard to pin down health impacts. And then, of course, there are the direct impacts of diseases. So then there's some other questions. And Asma, can you see these other questions?
I believe so.
So, here's one about where Green Muslims is located.
Right. Yeah, I see that one.
Do you want to go ahead and take some of these next ones?
Yes.
Okay.
So Green Muslims is, we're locally in Washington, D.C. We currently, so where is it situated and how can we connect with them? So if you go to our website, www.greenmuslims.org, there should be an About Us page where you can, or an info button, and you can send an email and somebody will respond. I would also suggest emailing Colin, so it's just his first name, Colin @greenmuslims.org. And depending on what you want to connect on, I know that they will be able to make that happen. The one thing I will say is Green Muslims is a entirely volunteer-run organization, so each one of us that has been on the board, either previously or currently, we do it out of a lot of care and love, but we just want to set the expectation that since it is a volunteer-run organization, that we try to bring on other volunteers to help us get some work done, but sometimes it's hard to be very, very responsive. And then I think the next question is how can we start a local Green Muslims chapter and connect with Interfaith Power and Light? So Bri, I'll answer the first one, and then I'll let you do the Interfaith Power and Light question. Okay, so we actually don't have, this is something that Green Muslims has been thinking about doing chapters. So currently there is the larger Green Muslims umbrella, which is in Washington, D.C. We became a nonprofit actually this year during Ramadan. There are some offshoot chapters. So there's a Green Muslims New Jersey, there is a Green Muslims Wisconsin, and there's also a Green Muslims Oregon. So those are the other three quote-unquote chapters. Again, if you were to email Colin, maybe let's start that conversation. I think it would be great. Texas is such a big state. If the person who asked this question is in Texas, it would be great to have Green Muslims representation in Texas to figure out how to start a chapter or to get things moving. One of the things that we have been doing for folks that are interested is just handing out our resources, and then, you can start small by maybe starting a little club or a group at your local mosque, or Islamic school, and have that kind of be the first way into doing a local chapter. We don't have anything that's quite formal though.
So Interfaith Power and Light is a more formal structure. So no matter where you are, in the country, it's quite likely that your state has a chapter of Interfaith Power and Light, and the way that you can connect with that chapter is Interfaith Power and Light's website is www. And then the whole name, all spelled out as one word, interfaithpowerandlight.org. So interfaithpowerandlight.org, and they have a list on the website of the contacts for each state interfaith power and light. And if somehow you are in a state that doesn't have one, they'll be happy to work with you to start one. If you're in Texas, you should just call us at, or email us or go to our website and find our information. That's in this presentation. And incidentally, this presentation will be available when we're done, and we'll be posting it on the Texas Impact website as well, which is texasimpact.org. So you'll be able to get access to all the content. It'll probably take me a little bit, so don't go look for it 15 minutes after this event, but I'll get it up today. But if you are in Texas, if you are in one of the big cities, Austin, Houston, San Antonio, Dallas, Fort Worth, there is a local interfaith power and light unit in your city, and we'll be able to tell you the name of the contact person in your local area that you can get in touch with, and you can go to monthly potlucks or other team building events as well. So there's lots of ways to connect. Another question. So I'm really interested in this question, and I'm cognizant of the time. We have probably time for just one or two more questions. But this one says, how can we promote or make people aware about climate change when they don't feel like it's urgent because it's not something that's impacting them right now and they can't really think out ahead 30 years? It's a really good question. I'm sorry that I think the new wave of climate refugees maybe really is going to make people realize that it's more imminent than they thought. I think there's nothing like having people come to the United States and say, I had to come here because my country doesn't exist anymore because it's underwater. That would maybe get some people's attention. But it is true, on any given day, people don't wake up and think, most people don't wake up and think, what can I do to impact a situation that's not really going to probably matter as much to me as it is to my great-grandchildren. I think I would recommend at this point to turn it back over to maybe to the organizers and particularly to the brother who gave the opening reflection. And Asma, if you have any last thoughts, maybe you could wrap it up too. But just to say, this is where our faith is really so important, right? Because all of our faith traditions tell us it's not just about me and what happens to me today. I'm part of a connected community that goes back for generations and forward for generations, and in some way I am related to all of those generations right now. So in my Christian faith tradition, there's an idea, a term that we a lot of times call the communion of saints, and what we mean is that all the people who have ever been alive are really present spiritually with us right now, and we're responsible to all of them, whether they haven't been born yet or they died thousands of years ago. We're all part of one human community. So we turn to our faith a lot, I think, for the perspective on why it is that my actions today are important, even if I could get through my whole day and never feel like I experienced climate change. So I'll stop there, and Asma, if you have any wrap-up about that or any of the other questions, and then we'll turn it back to the organizers. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, I also want to thank everyone, especially the organizers for putting this on and Bee for bringing me in. I will also say that, that as Muslims that we too have a responsibility to this planet, but we were entrusted with the responsibility as Khalifas to really protect the planet. We were only ever given one Earth, and it's something that we have to pass down to generations and something that we are going to be answerable to. So climate change is something that it impacts us, and it's something that should be talked about more and highlighted more within our faith tradition and within the spaces that we occupy. So inshallah, that this is something that will inspire people on the phone to maybe take more action within your community. And with that, I would like to turn it over to the organizers. Thanks again.
This is a very maybe again. I just wanted to make a comment about the question definition of what we can do. So as I discussed about this, it is, if we have to take it, internalize it in our environment and in our personal efforts, because Islam asks us to, let's say the Quran, that establish the balance in your life and do not go astray in the balance, right? So that is the main purpose that will drive us for the conservation, for securing our climate. And so basically, as Sister Asma, she mentioned about so many small things that we can do that can add up to this. Imagine if, 1.6 billion Muslims, they are just cognizant of conserving water while they are doing wudu, right? One of the initiatives that they have is wudu. That will make a big difference. So each one of us has a responsibility. We need to know globally what is going on, what is the dangers, what is the catastrophes that can bring. But in our own lives, we can do so many things just by following the principles of justice and by being thankful of the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He has given us so much. And one last thing that I also want to say, that there is another thing, when you are not thankful of mercy, then you become kind of denier of His mercy also, right? And there is also a verse of Quran that in the Mubazirina Kanu Yahmana Shayatin, in the Shaitan there are people who waste and do extravagance. They are like a brother of devils, right? And what is that make devil is the devil or Satan? The Satan is that he is the denier of the Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if we keep this in our mind all the time that we do, when we teach our kids, I think we can make a big difference. And one other thing I also want to mention, that Texas Impact is our partner, especially in interfaith social injustice, and ICNA is a member of Texas Impact. So if you would like to participate in any of the Texas Impact programs, you can contact with us, Sister Asma or Sister Dia, especially as he mentioned, I think the interfaith power and light initiative. So we can participate as a ICNA, being member of the Texas Impact and that. So Jazakallah khair, back to Sister Sadila.
Oh, what a wonderful session this was. I would like to sincerely thank our esteemed speakers, Bee and Asma, for this awesome, informative presentation and for answering our questions. On behalf of the ICNA Council for Social Justice Dallas, thank you and Jazakallah khairan to all our listeners for attending this webinar. I hope you all have learned a lot from it. Alhamdulillah. I think we have got a chance to get ideas to how to tackle the challenge of climate change and ideas that we can take back to our families and communities to benefit ourselves and our future generations, inshallah. We will continue arranging such educational webinars in the future as well, and we will keep you posted. Jazakallah khairan once again for attending. Kindly send your feedback about this webinar to the address that Uzma will be showing on the screen. And I would now like to make the dua. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت ونتوب إليك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.